Hey everyone, just wanted to expand on my last video with a tip that a YouTuber, Oren Keep, actually gave me on how to also give more movement to bass sounds in a very creative way. So I'm just gonna hop right into it. I have a wavetable set up here. You could pick whatever wave you want, or you could use Serum, you can use Pigments, you can use whatever your favorite synth is, because we're just looking for a very simple signal. In this case, I actually have one that's between a triangle and a saw wave. And all of the magic happens here. You'll notice I have an audio effect rack and I have two knobs that are rocking back and forth, essentially in opposite directions. What this is doing is one of the knobs is connected to a digital saturator and one is connected to an analog modeled saturator. And that is Saturn 2. And for the analog modeled one, Decapitator. These knobs are mapped to the dry and the wet signal from the distortions. So thankfully, Decapitator as well as Saturn, they both have a dry wet within their plugin. We can just map that then to these macros. And what we're doing here is we're adjusting how much digital saturation to give the signal and how much analog modeled saturation to give the signal. And we have them moving in opposite directions so that we don't get too much of either of them, because otherwise then you're just stacking saturations, which is another technique you can do. It won't really necessarily give you movement, but in this case, we want to avoid that effect. We still want our signal to be kind of clean and noticeable, but we want to give it movement. And so without applying unison or any other tricks or hyperdimension, things like that, we're just moving distortion around between an analog modeled saturator and a digital modeled saturator. What we get, I also have, I should mention, just an OTT at the end, just to level out the signal a little bit more. Here is what you get. So you notice we're getting movement in our signal just from changing the saturation levels of both the digital and the analog saturator. If we want, what we could also do is inspect this. Let's freeze the arrangement and then let's look at the waveform and see what's actually happening. I'm gonna take the signal, it's frozen, drag it down here to an audio track. Now you can save processing power, and I usually like to keep things frozen and still just disabled in my project in case I want to go back and see what I did with them. So you can always go back here, and even though you froze something, you can still see your LFOs, your signal chain, you have that information, while in the audio, you kind of lose that. Anyway, next I'm going to do a Control J on this clip that's just going to consolidate it. And this is a little bit of a trick for normalizing your audio, because when we consolidate it, you notice it goes to negative 12.8 dB. That's essentially our peak of our signal right now. If I just double click this gain, it's going to bring it to 0, which is going to be very loud. So I'm not going to play that. And then I'm just going to take this down negative 12 on our channel. So we've essentially bumped up the gain by 12 dB, essentially reduced the gain by 12 dB, but really we're just doing it for visual purposes so that we could take a look at the signal. And you could see there is very apparent, obvious movement within the signal. Mess around with this. Whether you have Decapitator, Saturn, or you want to just use the saturator within Ableton, you might have different saturation plugins, and some of them will have dry wet, some of them won't. But essentially what you're doing is you're turning on multiple saturators, and then you're modulating the dry wet signal path of all of the distortions simultaneously, and that's going to give you movement in your signal. So the last thing I just want to show, we could just take a look at span and see if that gives us any more insight. Let me just freeze this track again, just for processing. Yeah, and here you can see as I'm playing it, if you take a look at it, and you'll see that there's different harmonics being put in play by these different saturators. And that's really what you're getting. You're getting this harmonic movement from different algorithms, from different saturators, and then you're dry wet mixing all the saturators together to kind of get your own algorithm, You could think about it like that. You're taking algorithms from multiple saturation sources and trying to merge them together coherently to make a new sound, potentially a new saturator. You could even think of it as that. You don't have to use, how I showed earlier, the LFOs to modulate things, but I think it's a very handy tool that Ableton gives you to modulate these macros. You could always do stuff by hand by putting, let's say, 3 saturators on 33, 33, 33%, and then seeing how your signal sounds then, and then manually manipulating them. I think it's a lot of fun using LFOs, seeing what kind of sounds you get from them. Try different sort of LFOs. You don't have to go for a sine wave. Try something even more experimental. Try random, see what kind of random sounds you get, and then freeze them, flatten them, and you might actually have some really cool bass one shots just from applying that technique. And these shots will have movement in them. Thank you again, Oren Keep, for this tip. And I just wanted to quickly show all of you what I've just learned today, and hopefully you can use it in some of your future productions.